I knew he was cheating 3 months before our anniversary, and I didn't confront him, I planned. While he whispered to her on late-night calls, I was transferring assets, buying a cottage under my maiden name, and consulting lawyers in silence. So when he finally walked through that door with her on his arm, confident and cruel enough to introduce us over the dinner I'd made, he had no idea I'd already erased myself from his life, and that by morning, I'd be gone forever. If you're ready to hear the whole story, click subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I'll be sharing another story that's just as moving and unforgettable. You won't want to miss it. But let me back up to that night, our 15th anniversary. The rain started around 6 o'clock, just as I finished setting the table. White roses in the center, the same kind I carried at our wedding, candles flickering soft light across the dining room. I'd made his favorite meal, roasted salmon with lemon butter, steamed asparagus, and a tart for dessert. Soft jazz played from the speaker in the corner, the kind we used to dance to in our kitchen when we first moved into this house. I stood there in my navy dress, the one he once said made my eyes look like the ocean. My hands were steady as I poured wine into 2 glasses. Well, 3 glasses now. I'd known for weeks he might not come alone. The front door opened at 7:30. I heard his keys hit the bowl in the entryway, the sound I'd heard 1,000 times before. But then I heard something else, laughter. Her laughter. Light and careless, like wind chimes. I didn't move from my spot at the head of the table. Ethan appeared first, his salt and pepper hair damp from the rain, his expensive coat dripping water onto our hardwood floors. He was smiling, that easy smile he gave to clients and strangers. The smile that used to be just for me. Then she stepped out from behind him. Tessa Blake, 28 years old. Long, dark hair, red lipstick, a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She looked at our home like she was already measuring it for new curtains. "Amy," Ethan said, his voice calm, almost cheerful. Like he was introducing me to a colleague at a work party. "I thought it was time you met Tessa. We didn't want to hide anymore. It's time to be honest with everyone." The words hung in the air like smoke. Thunder rumbled outside, shaking the windows. The candles flickered, casting shadows across his face. Our wedding photo on the mantel seemed to watch us, frozen in a moment when we still believed in forever. I looked at Tessa. She met my eyes without flinching, one hand resting on the purse slung over her shoulder. She wasn't uncomfortable. She was confident, victorious even. I looked at Ethan. His hand hovered near the small of her back, protective and familiar, the same way he used to touch me. Then I looked at the table, the salmon getting cold, the wine breathing, the white roses starting to wilt in the heat of the candles. I should have screamed. I should have thrown the wine in his face. I should have collapsed into tears and begged him to explain how he could do this to me. Instead, I smiled. A small, calm, terrifying smile. "Dinner's ready," I said softly. "Let's eat. But before I tell you how that dinner ended, you need to understand who we used to be. Because the man sitting across from me that night, introducing his mistress in our home, wasn't always a stranger. Once upon a time, he was everything I'd ever wanted. We met 15 years ago at an art gallery downtown. I was 34, a literature professor at a small college, wearing a green dress and carrying a glass of cheap wine. He was 37, an architect with kind eyes and paint-stained hands from working on a restoration project. We stood in front of the same painting, a stormy seascape, and he asked me what I thought it meant. "Chaos pretending to be beauty," I said. He laughed. "Or beauty refusing to apologize for being chaotic." We talked for 3 hours that night. About art, about books, about the difference between building something and creating something. He told me he dreamed of restoring old homes, bringing history back to life. I told him I taught students about love and loss in novels, hoping they'd recognize both in their own lives. "You see stories everywhere, don't you?" he asked. Only the true ones, I said. 6 months later, he proposed on the riverbank where we'd taken our first walk together. We got married that fall in a small ceremony under oak trees dripping with Spanish moss. I was 35. He was 38. We felt like we'd finally gotten it right, two people who'd survived bad relationships and false starts, choosing each other with clear eyes and full hearts. Our first decade together felt like a dream I was afraid to wake up from. We bought this old colonial house on Magnolia Street, a place with good bones but peeling paint and crooked floors. We spent weekends sanding hardwood and arguing playfully over paint colors. I'd read poetry aloud while he sketched renovation plans. He'd surprise me with flowers. I'd surprise him with first editions of architecture books. "We're building something real," he used to say, one hand on the wall, one hand holding mine. "Something that lasts." And I believed him. But somewhere around year 10, things started to shift. His architecture firm expanded. He took on bigger clients, more prestigious projects. He started coming home later and later, smelling like expensive restaurants and other people's perfume. Our dinners together became shorter, quieter. Our conversations became reports instead of discussions. "How was your day?" I'd ask. "Busy," he'd say, scrolling through his phone. I told myself it was just a phase. Relationships require work, require patience. I was a literature professor. I knew every great love story had conflict in the middle. I thought we were just in our second act, waiting for the resolution. I was wrong. Year 12, he forgot our anniversary for the first time. I'd made reservations at the restaurant where he proposed. I wore the same green dress from the night we met. I sat at that table alone for 40 minutes before the text came. "Emergency at work. So sorry. Rain check?" There was no emergency. I found out later he was at a hotel bar with a client, a female client, with long dark hair and expensive taste. That's when I should have known. That's when the woman I used to be should have asked harder questions, should have stopped making excuses, should have seen the truth written on every late-night text and unexplained receipt. But I didn't. I smiled. I forgave. I convinced myself that love meant being patient. And that patience nearly destroyed me. The signs started small, like hairline cracks in a foundation. The kind you don't notice until the whole structure starts to crumble. It began with the late nights. Ethan had always worked hard, but suddenly he was staying at the office until 9, 10, sometimes 11 at night. "Big project," he'd say, kissing my forehead without looking at me. "You know how it is." I did know. Or at least, I thought I did. Then came the smell. Perfume that wasn't mine, something expensive and floral, clinging to his shirt collars and coat sleeves. When I mentioned it once, casually, while doing laundry, he barely looked up from his phone. "Must be from a client meeting. You know how close those conference rooms get." I nodded. I smiled. I put the shirt in the wash and told myself I was being paranoid. But the cracks kept spreading. His phone became his constant companion. At dinner, it sat face down beside his plate, buzzing softly every few minutes. He'd glance at it, then at me, then back at his food. The conversations we used to have about books, about his projects, about our dreams for the future, shrank down to nothing. "How was your day?" I'd ask. "Fine," he'd say. "Did the Harrison project get approved?" "Yep. Want to watch that documentary tonight?" "I'm tired. Maybe this weekend." The weekend never came. I started noticing other things. A receipt in his coat pocket from a hotel restaurant downtown, 2 entrees, 2 drinks, 1 dessert to share. A text message that flashed across his screen while he was in the shower. "Can't wait to see you again. T." T. Not a client name I recognized. Not a colleague he'd mentioned. Just T. One night, about 6 months before our anniversary, I found a lipstick stain on the cuff of his white dress shirt. Dark red, pressed into the fabric like a signature. I stood in our bedroom holding that shirt, staring at that mark, feeling something inside me crack wide open. When he came home that night, I was waiting in the living room, the shirt folded neatly on the coffee table between us. "Ethan," I said quietly, "we need to talk." He glanced at the shirt, then at me, his face unreadable. "About what?" "About where you've really been. About who you've been with." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, panic, maybe, or guilt, but then his expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. Contempt. "You've been reading too many novels, Amelia," he said, his voice cold and dismissive. "Not everything is a dramatic plot twist. Sometimes a lipstick stain is just a lipstick stain. Maybe someone bumped into me at a restaurant. Maybe it's from dry cleaning. I don't know, and frankly, I don't care." He picked up the shirt, walked past me, and went upstairs. That night, I sat alone in the dark living room, listening to the rain tap against the windows. The house felt enormous and empty, even with him sleeping upstairs. I realized, with a clarity that hurt more than anger, that I'd become a ghost in my own marriage. I was there, but not seen, present, but not noticed. I was a piece of furniture he'd grown tired of. The final crack came 2 weeks later. I was looking for my sunglasses in his car, reaching under the passenger seat, when my fingers brushed against something small and cold. I pulled it out and held it up to the light. A diamond earring. Delicate, expensive, catching the sun like a tiny accusation. It wasn't mine. I sat there in his car, holding that earring in my palm, and something fundamental shifted inside me. The cracks in our foundation weren't just showing anymore, they were splitting wide open, and I could finally see what had been hiding underneath all along. Lies, betrayal, and a husband who thought I was too naive, too trusting, too buried in my books to ever figure it out. He was wrong. That's when I stopped asking questions and started finding answers. Something strange happened in those final 3 months. I became lighter, not happier, exactly, but freer. Like I'd been holding my breath underwater for years and finally broke the surface. Every document I signed, every dollar I transferred, every plan I finalized, it all felt like shedding weight I didn't know I'd been carrying. I started writing again. Short stories, mostly. All about women who walked away. Women who chose silence over screaming. Women who disappeared into new lives like smoke dissolving into air. I'd write late at night while Ethan was working late, which we both knew meant he was with her. My colleagues at the college noticed the change. "You seem different," one said during lunch. "Good different. Like you've figured something out." I just smiled. Maybe I have. Ethan noticed too, though he misunderstood completely. He thought my calmness meant acceptance. He thought I'd made peace with his absence, his distance, his lies. One morning over coffee, he actually said, "I'm glad you're doing better, Amy. You seem lighter." "I am," I told him, and I meant it. He started getting careless, bragging about work trips that I knew were romantic getaways, mentioning Tessa from the design firm casually in conversation, testing whether I'd react. I never did. I'd just nod and ask what he wanted for dinner. He thought he was winning. 2 months before the anniversary, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it, and my stomach dropped. "He's finally leaving her soon. Can't believe we pulled this off. She has no idea. It was meant for someone else, a friend of hers, probably. But she'd sent it to me by mistake." A second later, another text. "Oh my God, wrong number. Delete that." I stared at those words for a long time. "She has no idea," followed by a laughing emoji. I didn't respond. I didn't delete it. I took a screenshot, added it to my folder, and went back to grading papers. The next week, I met with Monica one last time. She slid a thick manila envelope across her desk. "Divorce papers," she said quietly. "Everything's in order. Asset division, property transfer, the works. He gets the house, you made sure of that. But everything else? That's yours. Your inheritance, your accounts, your freedom. All you have to do is sign and serve him." I signed my name carefully. Amelia Cross. Not Hart. Not anymore. "When?" Monica asked. "Our anniversary," I said. 15 years deserves a memorable ending." She squeezed my hand. "You're the strongest person I know." I wasn't sure about that, but I was the most determined. At home, I placed the divorce papers in a white envelope and wrote, "For Ethan," in elegant script across the front. I tucked it into my desk drawer, right next to the diamond earring and the plane ticket to Maine. 1 week before the anniversary, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror practicing. I'd read about this once in a psychology article, how astronauts practice emergency procedures until they become muscle memory. Calm in crisis. I looked at my reflection and said the words out loud. "Dinner's ready. Let's eat." My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. I tried different versions, different tones, but I kept coming back to the simplest one, the quietest one. "I don't need to shout to be heard," I told my reflection. The woman staring back at me looked different than she had 6 months ago. Older, maybe, but stronger, clearer. She knew exactly what she was doing. The days counted down. I bought white roses, the same kind from our wedding. I planned the menu, his favorite meal. I chose my outfit, the navy dress that used to make him smile. Everything had to be perfect, not for him, for me. For the woman who was about to walk out of this life and into a new one. The calendar on my phone flipped to the final page. November 7th. Our 15th anniversary. The storm had been building for months. Tonight, it would finally break. The rain started at 6 o'clock, exactly as the weather forecast predicted. I took it as a sign. Even nature was setting the scene. I set the table with our wedding china white plates with gold trim that we'd registered for 15 years ago. White roses in the crystal vase his mother had given us. Candles in silver holders we'd bought at an antique shop on our honeymoon. I wanted everything to look perfect, not for him, for me, so I could remember this moment exactly as I'd planned it. I wore the navy dress and the pearl earrings he'd given me on our first anniversary, back when gifts still meant something, back when he still saw me. The salmon came out of the oven at 7. I plated everything carefully, poured wine into 3 glasses I'd known for days he wouldn't come alone, and waited. 7:30. The front door opened. I heard his keys, her laugh, and I felt nothing but cold, perfect calm. They appeared in the doorway of the dining room, both slightly wet from the rain. Ethan in his expensive coat, confident and casual. Tessa in her black dress and red lipstick, looking at our home like she was already planning where to put her things. "Amy," Ethan said, and the ease in his voice made my skin crawl. "I thought it was time you met Tessa. We didn't want to hide anymore. It's time to be honest with everyone." Tessa smiled. A small, victorious smile. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't uncomfortable. She thought she'd won. I looked at both of them for a long moment. The candles flickered. Thunder rumbled outside. Our wedding photo watched from the mantel. Then I smiled back. "Dinner's ready," I said softly. "Let's eat." The confusion on their faces was almost worth it. Almost. Ethan recovered first, his lawyer-trained composure sliding back into place. "That's very gracious of you, Amy. Please, sit." I gestured to the chairs. Ethan at the head of the table where he always sat, Tessa to his right, me across from her watching. They sat slowly, exchanging glances. Tessa's confidence faltered slightly. This wasn't how she'd imagined this going. She'd probably expected tears, screaming, broken dishes. She'd gotten candlelight and good wine instead. I served the salmon, placed it in front of them with steady hands. "I hope you like it," I said. "It's Ethan's favorite." "It looks wonderful," Ethan said, but his voice was careful now, uncertain. We ate in silence for a few minutes. The only sounds were forks against china, rain against windows, and the jazz music still playing softly in the background. Every clink of silverware sounded like a countdown. Tick, tick, tick. Tessa cleared her throat. Listen, Amelia. Please, I interrupted gently, my voice perfectly calm. Finish your wine first. She blinked, caught off guard. Ethan's jaw tightened. I took a sip of my own wine, watching them over the rim of the glass. Tessa shifted in her seat, uncomfortable now. Ethan cut his salmon into smaller and smaller pieces, barely eating. This is absurd, Tessa finally said, setting down her fork. We came here to be honest, to stop pretending. Ethan and I are together. We have been for almost a year, and 11 months, I said quietly. It's been 11 months, since last December, when you met at the Morrison Project opening. The color drained from Ethan's face. You knew? He whispered. I knew, I said simply. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the thunder seemed to pause. Then why didn't you say anything? Tessa demanded, her voice sharp now, defensive. Why go through all this? I stood slowly, smoothing my dress. Excuse me for just a moment. I walked out of the dining room, leaving them sitting there in confusion and growing panic. I could hear them whispering urgently, Ethan's voice low and angry, Tessa's high and nervous. In my study, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the white envelope. The one I'd prepared weeks ago. My hands didn't shake. My breathing was steady. I walked back into the dining room. They both looked up as I approached. I moved around the table slowly, deliberately, and placed the envelope next to Ethan's wine glass. What's this? He asked, but I could see he already knew. The fear in his eyes told me everything. Open it, I said. He stared at the envelope like it might explode. Tessa leaned closer, trying to see. With shaking fingers, Ethan tore it open. Papers slid out onto the table. Divorce papers, asset transfer agreements, bank statements showing empty joint accounts, and a single handwritten note on cream-colored stationery. I watched him read it, watched his face go from confusion to shock to devastation. You can have her, the note said. You can have the house. But you'll never have me again. The candles flickered. The rain pounded harder against the windows. I walked to the coat rack and pulled on my jacket, picked up my purse already packed with everything I needed, my wallet, my new ID with my maiden name, my plane ticket. Amy, Ethan stood, the papers scattering to the floor. Amy, wait. I turned back one last time, looked at the table I'd set, the home we'd built, the man I'd loved, and the woman who thought she'd won. Goodbye, Ethan. I opened the front door. The rain was cold and sharp, but it felt like freedom, and I stepped out into it without looking back. The door closed behind me with a soft click. Final. Absolute. Inside, I could hear Ethan's voice rising, panicked. Amy, aim. But I was already walking down the steps, into the rain, into my new life. Behind me, in that dining room, Ethan stood frozen, staring at the papers scattered across the table. Tessa hovered behind him, her face pale, no longer looking victorious. What is this? She whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He was reading the divorce papers, his hands shaking. His eyes scanned line after line, and with each one, I imagine his world crumbled a little more. Petition for divorce. Irreconcilable differences. Division of assets. His eyes caught on one line in particular. Petitioner waives all claims to marital home located at 847 Magnolia Street, Savannah, Georgia. Respondent assumes full financial responsibility for said property, including mortgage, taxes, and maintenance. She's giving you the house, Tessa said, confused. That's good, right? But Ethan kept reading, and then he saw it. The attached bank statements. Our joint savings account empty. The investment account his name was on emptied 3 months ago. The funds from Amelia's mother's inheritance that he thought had been spent years ago gone. She took everything, he breathed. What do you mean she took everything? You just said she gave you the house. The house! Ethan laughed, a bitter, broken sound. The house has a $600,000 mortgage, Tessa. Property taxes are $18,000 a year. And she made sure in these papers that I'm solely responsible for all of it. She didn't give me the house, she gave me an anchor. He collapsed into his chair, the papers falling from his hands. That's when he saw the note again. My handwriting, careful and elegant on cream-colored paper. You can have her. You can have the house, but you'll never have me again. But what Ethan didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that I'd been planning this for 3 months. 3 months ago, after I found that diamond earring, I'd made a decision. Not in anger, not in revenge, in clarity. I'd driven up to Camden, Maine. On a long weekend I told Ethan was a girls' trip. I'd walked along the rocky coastline, breathed in the salt air, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. That's when I found the cottage, small, weathered, perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. The owner was an elderly woman moving to live with her daughter. She wanted someone who'd love it the way she had. It's a place for starting over, she told me, her eyes kind. That's exactly what I need, I said. I bought it using my mother's inheritance money Ethan had forgotten about, money he'd assumed I'd spent on books and groceries years ago. I'd been quietly saving it, investing it, keeping it separate, just in case. I registered the deed under my maiden name, Amelia Cross, a woman who didn't exist in Ethan's world. Over the next months, I'd worked with Monica, my lawyer friend, moving money carefully and legally out of our joint accounts, early withdrawals from investments, citing home renovations that never happened, transferring funds to a new bank in Maine under my new name. I'd been so careful, so patient, every transaction small enough not to trigger alerts, every step planned weeks in advance. I'd updated my driver's license to my maiden name, citing personal preference. I'd had mail redirected to a P.O. box. I'd slowly moved my most treasured belongings, my mother's jewelry, my favorite books, my grandmother's quilt to a storage unit across town. I wasn't running away. I was methodically, intelligently, completely erasing myself from a life that no longer served me. And the most beautiful part? I made sure he kept the house. Our beautiful, expensive, money-draining house. The one that needed a new roof. The one with the vintage plumbing that broke every winter. The one with historical preservation restrictions that made every repair cost 3 times what it should. The house that was worth less than what he owed on it. I gave him exactly what he deserved. The appearance of winning and the reality of losing everything. Back in the dining room, Ethan finally moved. He grabbed his phone, hands shaking, and dialed my number. The number you have reached is no longer in service. He tried again. Same message. Her phone's disconnected, he said, his voice hollow. Tessa stood there, looking at the man she'd won, and slowly realizing what that victory actually meant. A man with no money, a house he couldn't afford, and a scandal that was about to become very, very public. Because I'd made one final arrangement before I left. I'd sent copies of everything, the text messages, the hotel receipts, the photos to a friend of mine who worked at the local paper's lifestyle section. Not for publication, just to have. Just in case Ethan tried to paint himself as the victim. Insurance. Ethan stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. I have to find her. He ran to the door, threw it open, and stepped out into the rain. The street was empty. No taillights, no sign of me. He called my college, left a frantic voicemail with my department head. He called my friends. None of them knew where I was, or if they did, they weren't telling him. By morning, he'd realized the truth. Amelia Hart had vanished completely, and Amelia Cross was already home. By dawn, Ethan had called everyone. My department chair at the college, my closest colleagues, the few friends I'd kept over the years. even my distant cousin in Atlanta who I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hart," my department chair said coolly. Professor Hart submitted her resignation 3 weeks ago, effective immediately after the semester ended. She said she was pursuing other opportunities. 3 weeks ago. While he was planning romantic dinners with Tessa, I was planning my exit. He called the police next, frantic and desperate. "My wife is missing. She left last night and I can't find her." The officer who took the report was polite but unhelpful. "Sir, your wife left you divorce papers and walked out voluntarily. She's not missing. She left." "But where did she go?" "That's not police business, sir. She's an adult. She has every right to go wherever she wants." Ethan hung up, staring at his phone like it had betrayed him. By mid-morning, my social media accounts were gone. Facebook, Instagram, even my LinkedIn. I'd deleted them all days ago, scheduled to disappear the morning after our anniversary. Every photo, every post, every trace of Amelia Hart, erased. It was Tessa who noticed the news first. She was scrolling through her phone, sitting at Ethan's kitchen counter, my kitchen counter, when she went pale. "Ethan," she said quietly, "you need to see this." The local paper's online edition had just published a story, "Prominent Savannah Architect's Marriage Ends in Scandal." The article was careful, legally vetted, but it included enough details to destroy him. The affair, the anniversary dinner, the mysterious disappearance of his wife, and buried in the piece was a quote from an anonymous source close to the couple, detailing his year-long infidelity. By noon, the story had spread. Social media picked it up. Architecture blogs discussed it. His firm's phone started ringing. Clients called to postpone meetings. Projects were suddenly on hold. The Historical Society, which had been considering him for a major restoration contract, sent a terse email. "We've decided to go in a different direction." His reputation, built over decades, crumbled in hours. Tessa watched it happen from the sidelines, her victory turning to ash. She'd won a man with no money, a house he couldn't afford, and a career in freefall. And slowly, she began to realize Amelia hadn't just left Ethan. She'd destroyed him. "This is temporary," Ethan kept saying, pacing the living room. "This will blow over. I'll fix this." But Tessa was already looking at the door, wondering how quickly she could leave without looking like the villain she was. 300 miles north, in Camden, Maine, I woke to the sound of seagulls and crashing waves. My cottage was small, just 2 rooms, a kitchen barely big enough for one person, and a porch that overlooked the Atlantic. The floors creaked. The windows were old and drafty. The paint was peeling in places. It was perfect. I made coffee in a French press, wrapped myself in my grandmother's quilt, and sat on the porch watching the sunrise paint the water gold and pink. The air smelled like salt and pine. The morning was cold but clean. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I'd been here for 2 days, and already I'd started building a routine. Morning walks along the rocky beach, collecting sea glass and smooth stones. Afternoons, writing in a journal I'd bought at the local bookstore. Evenings, reading by the fireplace, a cup of tea in my hands. The town librarian had offered me a job teaching creative writing workshops twice a week. "We don't have much budget," she'd apologized. "I don't need much," I'd told her. I'd also started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. Watercolors of the ocean, the lighthouse, the wild roses that grew along the cliff path. They weren't good, but they were mine. I'd introduced myself as Amelia Cross to everyone I met. The woman at the coffee shop, the man who sold fresh fish at the dock, the neighbors in the cottage next door. No one knew who I'd been. No one asked about my past. Here, I wasn't the betrayed wife or the abandoned professor or the woman whose husband brought his mistress home. I was just Amelia, a woman who liked her coffee black, her books worn, and her mornings quiet. One afternoon, I walked barefoot along the beach, letting the cold water wash over my feet. The sand was rough and real beneath me. The wind tangled my hair. And I laughed, actually laughed for the first time in months. This was freedom. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of choice. I'd chosen this, every step of it. Back in Savannah, 2 weeks after I left, Ethan received a postcard. It arrived in his mailbox with no return address, just a Portland, Maine postmark. On the front was a photograph of a lighthouse standing against a stormy sky. He flipped it over with shaking hands. There was no message, no signature, just a single quote written in elegant handwriting he'd recognize anywhere. "I am no bird, and no net ensnares me." Charlotte Bronte, Jane Eyre. He stood there in his driveway, holding that postcard, and finally understood. I wasn't coming back. I was never coming back. And somewhere in Maine, with the ocean at my feet and the sky above my head, I was finally, completely free. 6 months later, I sat on my porch watching the sun rise over the Atlantic, and I realized something important. Disappearing isn't about running away. It's about choosing silence over chaos. It's about knowing when the story you're living isn't yours anymore, and having the courage to write a new one. In Savannah, Ethan stood in the empty house on Magnolia Street, and the silence was deafening. Tessa had left 2 months after I did. She'd tried to make it work, tried to play house in the home I'd built, but reality set in quickly. The mortgage payments Ethan could barely afford, the clients who stopped calling, the whispers that followed them everywhere they went. "This isn't what I signed up for," she'd said one morning, her bags already packed. And just like that, she was gone too. Now Ethan lived alone in rooms that echoed with ghosts. The dining room where I'd served that final dinner, the bedroom where we'd once shared dreams, the study where I'd planned my escape while he slept, oblivious. He'd sold most of the furniture to pay bills. The walls had empty squares where photographs used to hang, our wedding photo, vacation pictures, evidence of a life that no longer existed. Some nights, he'd sit in the dark and replay that anniversary dinner in his mind. The candles, the white roses, the way I'd smiled when I said, "Dinner's ready." He'd thought I was weak, compliant, too buried in my books to notice reality. He'd been so wrong. His firm had downsized. Most of his major clients had quietly moved on, citing creative differences or changing needs. The Historical Society project went to a competitor. His name, once respected, now carried a stain he couldn't wash away. He'd tried to find me, hired a private investigator who traced me as far as Portland, Maine, and then the trail went cold. Amelia Hart didn't exist anymore. And Amelia Cross was protected by privacy laws and careful planning. The investigator had shaken his head. "She doesn't want to be found, Mr. Hart. And honestly, she has every legal right to disappear." One evening, standing in the empty living room, Ethan picked up his phone and typed out a text to my old number, knowing it wouldn't go through, but needing to say it anyway. "I'm sorry. I understand now. I hope you're happy. Wherever you are." The message bounced back. Number disconnected. Just like us. In Camden, my life had become something I never expected. Simple and beautiful. I taught creative writing at the library every Tuesday and Thursday evening. My students were fishermen's wives, retired teachers, teenagers dreaming of bigger worlds. They wrote about their lives, their regrets, their hopes, and I guided them, encouraged them, celebrated them. "You have such wisdom," one student said after class, "like you've lived 1,000 lives." "Just one," I told her, "but I learned from it." I'd also started selling my paintings at the local art co-op. Watercolors of the ocean, the lighthouse, the wild roses that climbed the cliffs. They weren't masterpieces, but people bought them. Tourists mostly, looking for memories of Maine to take home. I made enough to live on. Not much, but enough. And I'd learned that enough was more than I'd ever had when I had everything. I'd made friends too, real ones. Sarah, who ran the bookstore and brought me coffee on cold mornings. James, the fisherman who saved the best catch for me. Margaret, my neighbor, who taught me how to make blueberry pie from scratch. None of them knew about Ethan, about Tessa, about the life I'd left behind. They only knew Amelia Cross, a woman who'd moved to Maine for a fresh start, who loved the ocean and old books and quiet mornings. And that was exactly who I wanted to be. One afternoon, I sat at my small desk by the window, working on a new story. It was about a woman who walked into the ocean and emerged as someone new, someone free. As I wrote, I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the planning, the moment I walked out that door into the rain. And I realized he taught me betrayal, but I taught myself freedom. That was the real victory, not the divorce, not his ruined reputation, not even the peace I'd found in Maine. The victory was knowing I had the strength to choose myself, to walk away from everything familiar and build something true. The sun rose higher, turning the ocean from silver to gold. I set down my pen and walked out onto the porch, barefoot, my coffee warm in my hands. The waves crashed against the rocks below. Seagulls called overhead. The morning air was cold and clean and full of possibility. I smiled, not because I'd won, not because he'd lost, but because I'd learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destruction or anger or proving a point. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is peace. I took a sip of my coffee, breathed in the salt air, and watched another day begin. Amelia Hart was gone, but Amelia Cross? She was just getting started. If this story moved you, I hope it reminds you that it's never too late to choose yourself. That walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is disappear into the life you deserve. So tell me, would you have stayed and fought, or would you have vanished? The answer might surprise you. And if you want more true stories about women who turned betrayal into power, subscribe to this channel. We share real stories of resilience, revenge, and redemption every single week.